Welcome, everybody, to our presentation for the Art of Estate Planning. It is the 10th of July, 2025. Today, I am thrilled to welcome a very special guest. We've got Denise Cheng of Equity Trustees. So, she is the National Manager of their Philanthropic and Giving section. And today, she has come to talk to us about the vehicles available for structured giving, those charitable bequests, and how we can incorporate that into our estate planning, drafting, and recommendation strategy, and to let us know the solutions that are available with equity trustees. So I think we all have this coming up very frequently on our matters, and we're really going to get a lot out of today. So, Denise, a warm welcome, and I'll hand over to you because everyone's here to hear from you.
Amazing. Thanks, Tara. And I'm so pleased to be here and I really appreciate the warm welcome. And I've been sitting on the periphery of the Facebook page for a couple of months now and love the dialogue and the sharing that happens in the community. So just really appreciative of the opportunity to chat about one of my favorite topics. So just before we start, I do want to acknowledge the traditional owners of land on which I'm coming to you from today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. So, just a little bit of context. As Tara mentioned, I'm part of the philanthropy team here at Equity Trustees. We have been in the charitable trust space for more than 145 years. And not only do we support families who are no longer with us and their philanthropic legacies, but we also support up and coming philanthropists who are activating their giving during their lifetime. And so we are so pleased to be able to share a little bit about our journey and the type of products that we're able to offer families and individuals across Australia. So today I'm going to cover off giving in general. So what is the context that we're currently in Australia today? The type when people are thinking about their giving, why they might be thinking about their giving, and as Tara said, some of the structures that allow families to activate their giving. And hopefully by the end of the hour, we will you'll actually have some of the understanding of what are some of the triggers for clients when they're contemplating philanthropy, understand the different structures that exist in Australia and have a couple of conversation starters when you think you might have the right opportunity to present it as an option to your client. Please definitely pop any questions you might have in the chat box, and we'll definitely, I'm sure, we'll cover all the questions along the way. So one of the things that we sorry, let me start again. Really wanted to give you guys the context of the environment that we're currently operating in terms of charitable giving in Australia. So the latest ACNC, so our regulators numbers, which were from 2023, 19 billion was donated or bequested in Australia in that year, an incredible amount of money. And interestingly, some of the research that we undertook earlier this year, late last year, was that 96% of our respondents, and it was about 1,000 people who were interviewed, actually gave in the previous 12 months. And interestingly, tax wasn't the key motivator. And in fact, it was, while it was seen, a windfall was seen as a one of the triggers, it wasn't the most important one. And really, it was actually around alignment to cause, a desire to make a difference, and having trust in a particular charity. On the right-hand side of the slide is a fantastic infographic that was shared by the Productivity Commission. There was a report into philanthropic giving last year. And as you can see, so many reasons for giving. And often, as I say to a lot of people I work with, when you've met one family, you've met one family. And I can probably have a family that represents every single one of those personal reasons for giving. And as Tara alluded to, we are definitely seeing the conversation around philanthropy and giving coming up more and more, whether it be estate planning conversations or succession conversations, conversations with the accountant, with the tax advisor, and it's because of this. This stat that we've heard very frequently in the media most recently, this 5.4 trillion that will be handed down over the next 20 years. So that's the latest figure that's come out of JB Weir in their bequest report, 5.4 trillion, and it's going to be 150 billion in this year alone. Another trend that we're seeing, which again is we're seeing a little bit more in our conversations with clients, the the increase of females being the custodians of that wealth transfer, and the women in the family being the holders of that wealth in the next generation. And a third trend that we're definitely seeing more and more of is those families that don't actually have succession, so households without children. And what does the conversation about giving and philanthropy mean for families without children? So I'm sure the when and when people give is very familiar to each of you. We're all familiar with the concept of a direct gift. So whether it's at 30 June and you give it to a tax appeal, or it might be a friend raising money for breast cancer, or doing a fun run. They're doing the City Surf, and so you give a little bit of money. Direct giving is very, very common. And we also see it very common that people are giving gifts via their estate. And you guys are the subject matter experts in that. A gift to RSPCA or the Salvation Army or Fred Hollows to their favorite organization. And so we often see direct giving out of your bank account and then a cash gift in the will. Something that's less familiar, but is definitely growing in popularity, is that middle box, which we call structured philanthropy or structured giving. So these are opportunities to leverage charitable trust structures to start giving either during someone's lifetime or via someone's will, but activating and leveraging the power of investments in order to be more strategic around giving. And today's conversation is all about what does structured philanthropy mean and what could it mean for your clients. So, structured giving in a very simple table is effectively mums and dads, individual givers, and even sometimes corporates and not for profits making contributions into a vehicle. It is a trust structure. Those monies in that trust structure are in a tax exempt environment, and it's invested in a tax effective way. And each and every year, the investment income from those trusts is donated out to eligible charities. And depending on the product that the clients are leveraging, it might be a combination of either a minimum 4% distribution, a 5% distribution, or potentially a percentage of income. But that's effectively what structured giving is, leveraging the power of investments to take a one-off contribution and creating impact over the long term. So at Equity Trustees, we've got about 1,200 of these under management, and each and every year, these trusts that we manage are contributing almost 100 million to the charitable sector each and every year, something we're incredibly proud of. This slide actually is the culmination of why I love structured giving. So this is actually a real example of one of our clients that put $1 million into a structured vehicle back in '98. And as you can see with the bar graph on the left-hand side, this is actually their exact movement of their account over the last 25 years. So clients seeded with $1 million. They've actually made no additional contributions since. Many of our families will add in year after year. This family chose to just put in a one-off donation of $1 million. As of today, that account is now valued at 2.9 million. And again, reiterating the fact that she's not added anything in since then, but it's now worth 2.9. And since 98, this family has distributed 1.83 million to community. And that original 1 million hasn't actually been touched. It's been that corpus has grown over time in more than 1.5 times the original value. So that is an incredible real life example of the power of structured giving. So we talked at the beginning about what are the triggers for people thinking about philanthropy? Why do they give? For many families, it is a financial reason for starting their philanthropy and starting a structured giving journey. They want to take advantage of the tax benefits. Tax deductions happen when money is put into the account, not when money is distributed to the organization and the charitable beneficiary. It's about seeding now and giving later. It's about maximizing tax benefits right here, right now, and really leveraging those tax exempt investment returns. And for some of our families, it's actually about thinking through, okay, I've actually got some discretionary income now. I may not have discretionary income in 5, 10, 15 years' time. So I'm going to start preparing now, saving for that time where I won't have as much cash flow, and then ensuring that there is a pot of funds available for my philanthropy in the longer term. So a lot of people start thinking about that strategy element, which leads me to that second box, which is because the financial and the tax incentive happens at the outset, it allows people time to make strategic decisions about where they want to give. It means that they can think carefully about it. Okay, I've got a research project that I want to support that's over a 5, 10-year period, because research often takes that long for outcomes to be seen. And I'm setting aside a pot of funds, I'm going to have it invested, and then I want monies to be distributed out in a strategic way over the next 10 years. It separates a financial incentive from the strategic giving, and that is becomes then it allows people to be more considered and purposeful around their philanthropy. And as I said, it gives people time and space to add that strategic lens. And I think the third box is probably where we see most of our families and clients in terms of why they actually start giving. Because more often than not, it's actually to do with the heart, and it's about honoring someone's legacy. It's about the opportunity to give back to community. It's about sharing the love of giving and the responsibility of wealth and the responsibility of giving back to the next generation. And that final dot point speaks to our households without families. But for some clients, it's actually about creating that enduring legacy that lasts beyond their lifetime, and especially in the case where there is no children to continue their personal legacy. So there are 3 products that we have here at Equity Trustees, and many of our friends in the sector also have similar products. And you'll know them as oftentimes you'll hear people refer to the words of foundation, and that's often what they're referring to when we're the first 2 boxes. And a perpetual charitable trust, which is probably something that you are quite familiar with in the estate planning world. As you can see, all 3 products are available right here, right now. But the 2 on the left, what we call ancillary funds, are the ones most used by philanthropists wanting to activate their giving during their lifetime. And then the middle one, the public ancillary fund subaccount, and the perpetual charitable trust are the 2 that we most see activated via an estate plan. So I'll go through each of these products and talk through the relevance for you as a estate planning specialist. So a private ancillary fund is most similar to a self-managed super fund and is often and it because of the fact that a private ancillary fund is a standalone trust structure that is registered with the ATO and with the ACNC, our regulator, and is managed as a family's individual vehicle. So the only people connected to a private ancillary fund are the family members and their associates. A private ancillary fund has a trustee. So the trustee can be the family members within a corporate trustee structure, or alternatively, equity trustees can be either a sole trustee or a co-trustee. Equity doesn't have to manage the investments. We work with a number of investment advisors to support the family around the investments. And what is very attractive about the private ancillary fund is that the tax deductions that a family receives when they put money into the structure, that tax benefit can be spread over 5 years. So it becomes really interesting for the family when they're talking to their tax accountant if they've got capital gains events that are happening over a multi-year period. With a private ancillary fund, giving is restricted to DGR1, so deductible gift recipient status item 1. And as mentioned previously, there is a minimum distribution requirement for a private ancillary fund, and that's 5%. So that's calculated as at the 30th of June valuation of the account, and 5% is of the 30 June value is what is distributed in the following year. Because of the complexity of setting up a private ancillary fund, going through the ATO, needing their own audit and financials, we do normally recommend that seed donations start at around the $1 million mark. If we're working with a financial advisor to do the investments, that's a $3 million starting point. But yeah, because of complexity, because of the costs attached, we do recommend that that's $1 million is about the right starting point for those clients. A public ancillary fund subaccount, this is the product that is leveraged by the client that I just mentioned in the previous slide. A subaccount, I like to describe it like being an industry super fund. Equity Trustees manages the umbrella account, and each individual family has a subaccount within the umbrella trust. We manage all the governance and compliance. We manage all the administration. So all the family has to do is really focus on the philanthropy and on the giving. And so for those families that are wanting to be strategic around their philanthropy, but have less of an interest in the investments, then this is actually the perfect vehicle for them, because really the giving looks and feels exactly as it would if you were a founder of a private ancillary fund. Again, as mentioned, giving is restricted to DGR1 entities. Tax benefits can be spread over 5 years. And the only difference being it is a 4% minimum distribution, but there are some government changes coming down the line where that might change again in the next few months or years. Now, the great thing about the public ancillary fund subcount is that it can be started during someone's lifetime or potentially activated in someone's will. And so if clients aren't quite ready to start it right here, right now, it is an option to leverage the same vehicle, but via the will. And I'll share why that's advantageous for certain clients in a few moments. But one of the things about the sub-account compared to the private ancillary fund, it is much more accessible. There's only a $5,000 seed donation that required to establish that. And of course, families can continue adding in tax deductible contributions each and every year to build their philanthropic pot. But the great thing about the sub account is very cost effective for the client to operate. And because some of the governance and compliance costs are spread across the many families within the umbrella, all the disbursement costs are shared, and so you pay a prorated amount, and it becomes quite cost efficient within the umbrella trust. The last product which I wanted to chat to you guys about today is what we call the Perpetual Charitable Trust. It's sometimes called a Testamentary Charitable Trust, but effectively it's a trust that's activated via the will and on the testator's passing. Some interesting things about the Perpetual Charitable Trust is that it is probably what we've has been historically popular, mainly because ancillary funds didn't exist until about 20 years ago. So many of the trusts under equity trustee stewardship are in fact perpetual charitable trusts. They are the more traditional trust structure. And there are some certain advantages with a perpetual charitable trust, which I'll go into in a second. But if families are approaching us around philanthropy either during their lifetime or in their will, depending on the type of giving they want to do, more often than not, we are finding that we are recommending the sub-account of the public ancillary fund as the more effective and efficient option for them. But going back to the PCT, as mentioned, it is activated via the will, and effectively the wishes in the will become the guiding instrument for the trust and the ongoing stewardship of the giving. There is no tax benefit for a PCT. It is tax exempt, so all the investments and the investment income is being generated in a tax exempt environment, but there is no deductibility for the estate. If you're setting up a PCT, there will be relevance for that later on, so I'll come back to that in a moment. There is also greater flexibility around the giving for a perpetual charitable trust. So for those clients that want to give to a non-DGR1, and oftentimes we find that there are a couple of areas where it gets a bit tricky around DGR1, so namely sport. However, sport as a conduit to supporting someone with a disability, for example, is DGR1. Gets a bit complex there. But sport animals as opposed to animal welfare, so animals per se, is not actually charitable and not DGR1. So there's a couple of things that if a client is specifically interested in those areas, then a PCT is perfect because normally those items can fall under charitable purpose. But for if anyone on the call has a specific question around that, please definitely reach out and we can go into the detail of your client's particular situation. And probably the only difference between a PCT and an ancillary fund is that distributions are usually a proportion of investment income as opposed to a percentage of value. But as mentioned, PCTs are we're using that structure less often because we're finding that a public ancillary sub-account is usually the most fit for purpose for most clients we're chatting to that are reaching out around structured philanthropy.
Denise, can I ask a question? I've got
Of
so many
course.
questions, and I'm sure you're going to answer them. And it's just so fascinating to see those different structures side by side. With the PCT, are there
Mm.
rules around who can be a tr controller? I assume as a trustee of the trust. Um, is that something equity trustees normally does, or is it more privately managed by whoever the testator nominates?
That's really good question, Tara. And I was just chatting to
Oh,
my estate planning colleagues earlier today about the exact point. So, if equity trustees can be nominated as the trustee, and it was actually something I was going to cover off later on. It becomes really interesting to consider who the trustee is, mainly because perpetual charitable trusts are, as the title says, they're perpetual. They don't have the 80-year rule that obviously testamentary trusts have. And so the consideration point is very much around, well, once a nominated trustee, that a person passes away or is no longer able to be a trustee, um, who is that person? Who will be the manager of that philanthropic legacy beyond that trustee's lifetime? And the other consideration is that perpetual charitable trusts are regulated by the ATO, by the ACNC and under trust law. And so ideally, you'll have someone that actually has the expertise and then the understanding of the compliance and governance obligations in order to make sure that they're not in breach of the regulators. And hence why many families and estate planners often will refer clients to us because as a professional licensed trustee company, this is our bread and butter. This is what we do on a day-to-day basis, and we do compliance and governance at scale, which is one of the advantages of potentially outsourcing that trustee duty.
Yeah, that's what's going through my head, the suitability and responsibility of that role is
Yeah,
needs a
not
lot of consideration.
definitely, definitely. And it's probably not dissimilar to the conversation we have with clients around who are you going to appoint as your executor? Do you does the potential nominee know what their responsibilities with will be and what the workload might be and the director duty
Yeah.
effectively. So a lot to think about when we're working in this space, particularly when we're talking perpetuity. It's a long time.
Yeah.
And I'll come back to that perpetuity conversation in a second as well. But great question, Tara.
Yeah, I think I'll let you keep going.
Yeah, yeah,
We'll have I'm sure we've all got lots of questions to ask at the end, but you'll probably answer a lot of them on the way through. So
fantastic.
yeah, I'll let you keep going with the
No worries.
recommendation.
Thank you. This is a decision-making flow chart that I love using because it becomes it's quite a simple way of thinking through, okay, what product would be is it best for my client? Very self-explanatory. Does your client want to start something during their lifetime and enjoy the power of philanthropy and the joy of giving, or does their cash flow and their inclination lean towards setting up philanthropy after they've passed away? And again, there's nothing, absolutely nothing stopping clients just putting a cash gift in their will. But when you explain to a client the power of compound interest and leveraging the framework of investments to turn $1 million into potentially 2.9 after 25 years and the potential impact of that initial gift, then the clogs start ticking in a family's brain, going, "Oh, that means my legacy can live well beyond my lifetime." So it becomes really interesting for clients to think through. But as mentioned, we often start with the end in mind. And we often will ask a client, well, who do you want to give to? Who are your favorite charities? What do you currently give to now? And depending on what their answer is, that will then take you down the two parts of the tree. So if they are already giving to DGR1 organizations, and realistically, most of the key names that you would recognize are DGR1. So your Smith families, your Fred Hollows, your Medicine Sans Frontières, your Royal Flying Doctor Service, all those organizations are DGR1. And realistically, it makes more sense and it's more cost effective for clients to go down the ancillary fund route. If a client says, I want to fund a non-DGR one, and Animals Australia is an example of an organisation that is registered on the ACNC but doesn't have DGR1, then the PCT route becomes more of becomes the better fit for the client. But this is a really great flow chart to use when you're having a conversation with the client. And Tara, again, some of the things that you mentioned is on this slide now. So when we're thinking through giving via an estate plan and in a will, these are definitely some of those questions that I work through with the family when we're chatting about through the options. As I mentioned, the first thing is actually to start with the end in mind. Actually asking the client, well, what do you want to give to? What do you want to support? Who are your favorite organization? Um, uh, and what's the why of your legacy. And by understanding the who, we can unpack whether or not that organization is a registered organization, is it a registered purpose, and is it actually even an eligible candidate for a structured giving vehicle. One of the interesting things that is definitely worth asking a client is, are those charities in Australia, or are they actually overseas? Because the minute you introduce overseas beneficiaries, it becomes quite tricky. And namely for the reason that trust structures in Australia, the majority of the distributions, so the money leaving the trust account each year, the majority of it has to actually stay in Australia or be given to DGR1 charities. So, for example, if the beneficiary is a hospital in Hong Kong or in East Timor or in Europe, yes, it has charitable purpose, but because it's an overseas entity, it has to stay under that 50% in order for it to be in a charitable structure, to be in a charitable trust in Australia. So you may be better off recommending to the client for it to be a cash gift in the will. Does the client want to make a cash gift, or are they actually wanting to gift a specific asset? The number of times that clients have said to us, "Oh, we want to gift our doll collection to the Australian Museum. We want to give our collection of paintings to the art gallery." One of the things that we do recommend to our estate planning specialists is definitely encourage the client to reach out to the intended beneficiary, particularly if you're talking assets, because one, the beneficiary that may not fit within their collection, it may not fit within their purpose, or they may not be in a position to accept it from a maintenance perspective. So it's always best to ensure that clients have had a conversation with the intended beneficiary, and just check that the beneficiary actually wants the assets. We've had some really unfortunate stories where the beneficiaries have actually said no, and then we're in a bit of a quandary of what to do with those physical assets. Definitely a question, and again, something that we've been talking about in this entire presentation. Is it an outright gift? Is it a cash gift? Or is in fact a structured giving vehicle and a gift in perpetuity something that might work for your client? One of the things which a lot of our estate planning specialists don't haven't necessarily considered in the context of charitable giving is, what is the tax position of the assets in your client's estate? So are there potential CGT implications? Are is the estate plan going to be up for a sizable tax bill when the estate moves into estate admin? And one of the things that is quite interesting about the products that I've shared with you today is that some of those products can potentially be tax favorable for an estate plan. So, depending if the client is wanting to support a DGR1 and they've got tax that needs to be offset, then the leveraging an ancillary fund, so a private ancillary fund or a public ancillary fund, can actually be quite tax effective for the estate. A perpetual charitable trust, as mentioned, contributions into a perpetual charitable trust aren't deductible. And so if you can potentially create some tax efficiencies by choosing the right product. So something that becomes a really interesting conversation with the accountant when you're drafting the estate plan. Are there existing vehicles that can be inserted in? Many of the families that are coming to us to have their estate planning done, they've already set up a sub account during their lifetime. They've got a private ancillary fund, and we've got clauses already for all of those scenarios, which can be inserted into a standard precedent and allows a family to just add their residual estate into an existing structure. Nothing new has to be set up. And it's a good question to ask to say, hey, do you already have a sub account? Do you already have a PAF? Because you don't need to then build something from scratch within the will. And Tara, exactly your question from earlier. If you are thinking of creating a perpetual charitable trust in a client's will, strong consideration needs to be around who will be the trustee. Is it a family member? Is it the executor? Is it an advisor? But what does succession look like? What happens when that person needs to resign? What happens next? And again, that point is often the reason why equity trustees and other professional trustee companies are approached because we don't die. We will be here for the term of the perpetual charitable trust. So yeah, succession and that trustee appointment is something to be conscious of. Which then leads me into the next point of perpetuity is a long time. And one thing that we encourage our specialists to think through is what what are we drafting? What are the instructions that our client is leaving in the will? And is it future proof? So one of our trusts here at Equity Trustees is the testator has put it in his perpetual charitable trust that he wants his money, his philanthropic legacy to be contributed to a research into polio. Now, as we know, we have a solution for that. We now have a vaccine, um, and um, and so what do we do in that case of and so from memory, I think we went to that one resulted in a cypre application. But you really don't want to have to be doing a cypre application and applying to the courts for a change in a will. So it's really important to think through how can we future proof the directions and the wishes and ensure that there's broad application should society change, should things evolve, and should problems disappear. Um, and often what we will, and the same to be said of naming beneficiaries. Many of our families have included specific beneficiaries like the Fred Hollows or the Salvation Army and the like. And the reality is, most of those organisations will continue to exist many, many years into the future. But there are always going to be mergers in our sector. There's always going to be charities that close their doors because they're no longer needed. So always really important to include a substitution clause and allow for trustees of the future to ensure that our clients' legacies can be honoured and executed. And one thing we really encourage our specialists to do is ensure if the wishes, if there are specific or even loose wishes in the will, really encourage families to put some of their thinking and their thoughts down on paper in what we would call a letter of wishes. It's always really useful 20, 30 years down the track to reflect back on what was the original intention of the client. And that will sometimes and will actually always influence our interpretation of what has been drafted in the will. But um, lots of things to think about, but I invite you to, if you've ever got any questions or you've got a scenario that you want to brainstorm, please reach out. Always happy to chat. Yeah, always happy to be a sounding board if you've got any queries that you might be presented by your client. Before I wrap up, wanted to uh, bit of a case study of one of our favorite perpetual charitable trusts. This is so Joan Peterson created the a charitable trust in 2006, and as you can see there, she was quite specific. She was gifting a property for the use of for families needing respite from treatment for if their child was experiencing cancer. The great thing about the how the will was drafted was that it wasn't tied to specifically to a specific organization. It extended a wish that organizations like Camp Quality could be the beneficiary of the trust. And in fact, Camp Quality still continues to be our partner for this particular trust. And it gives us the flexibility to work with the identified beneficiary to ensure that Joan's legacy is executed. Interestingly, with this particular will, Joan also gave us access to her share portfolio, and that share portfolio allows for the ongoing maintenance of the property. It allows us to pay for land tax, council rates, and all of those costs that are incorporated within the property. And it goes back to that future-proofing piece around drafting, is that a asset like a property is amazing, but the reality of of land and property is that it needs to be maintained. There's always going to be costs involved, and Joan was incredible in thinking ahead and saying, "Hey, we don't want the families to be living in a house that's falling down around them." As it happens, this particular property is in Salamander Bay and was impacted by all the wet weather we had 2 weeks ago, and unfortunately has a leak in the roof. So the trust is now paying for some of the repairs on the property. Um, so yeah, so really smart forward thinking by Joan in terms of thinking ahead for and to ensure that her legacy is executed as she wished. As I mentioned earlier, lots of different things to think about when considering whether or not philanthropy might be a suitable option for your clients, whether right now or via their will. Obviously, tax, a windfall event is a massive trigger for philanthropy, and is often the way we start conversations with clients. They've sold a business, they've sold shares, they've received inheritance, and that triggers tax. And sometimes creating a structured giving vehicle will allow that tax to be offset. As mentioned, next generation succession planning often is a trigger for philanthropy, but in the same token, families without families, and without a next generation, philanthropy is a really beautiful next step for them in terms of considering their legacy. Succession does get, as you guys know, succession gets tricky when there's blended families, and philanthropy sometimes is actually a really beautiful way of bringing blended families together, and is often the reason why a lot of our family starter structured to bring all those connect all the family dynamics, and it is a structure and strategy often will allow for a common foundation for a family to connect. If a family's already giving in a very significant way, year on year, that can be that's often a powerful trigger for moving towards a structure that will allow them to create greater impact over the long term. And as mentioned, a life event, someone passing away, wanting to honor their memory is often another strong trigger for starting a journey towards philanthropy. And the last thing, that last point there is very much that piece of I want my life to mean something. I want my legacy to be more than my lifetime. I want this to mean something. And often that those sentiments often are a really great precursor to a conversation around giving. Some of the questions that I often ask when I meet a family for a first time, um, and often is a great way to introduce the concept of philanthropy. Do they already give? What are some of their favorite charities? Do they volunteer? Um, are they thinking about legacy after they've passed away? And obviously, a gift in will is a great place to start that conversation. In terms of working with equity, we find that a conversation around philanthropy and giving is it starts a different conversation. It's a very similar to estate planning when you're talking about life beyond you and succession. It creates deep connection and trust with families, and it's what I love about giving. It is a great opportunity to have a different conversation around estate planning. Um, and it often leads to new opportunities. And the great thing about working with us is we've got a team of 20 who have deep connection within the for-purpose sector, and we're distributing 100 million a year to community. So we have an incredible breadth of knowledge that we're more than happy to share with others. All you have to do is reach out. Won't go into this. This is a brand new giving campaign that we've recently launched on social media. You might have seen it come across your Facebook or Instagram, but it's our attempt to introduce the concept of structured giving to the everyday Australian. So keep an eye out on your Facebook. Oh. And before I wrap up, I've mentioned it a few times today. Some of the other services that Equity Trustees offers, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is that we are subject matter experts in terms of trustee services, whether that be the establishment of family trusts or continuing trusts, personal injury trusts, disability, and we also have a very significant Indigenous native title trust service. Estates, whether that be executor appointments or estate admin. We have a wealth management team in-house supporting our individuals and families. And we also have a tax team who we definitely lean on a lot when we're ensuring that the charitable structures and also estate planning solutions we're putting in place is the most tax effective for our families. So just wanted to share that all things trusts, we're more than happy to help. And that brings us to the end of the conversation. But my email is on screen as well as my mobile number. And it, as I said, always more than happy to chat all things philanthropy and giving and charitable, the charitable sector. So always welcome a call if you ever have any questions.
Thank you so much, Denise. That was so informative. Um, have you got a few minutes in
I
case anyone
do.
has any questions?
I think we've got about 10 minutes to spare. So
Yeah.
time that one well.
So, yeah, well done for leaving question time. So, if anyone does have questions, you're welcome to jump on. Oh, thank you, Narelle, for the little party emoji. You're welcome to unmute and come on and ask Denise. I've got a heap of questions, but I don't want to hog the floor. But yeah, so here's your chance. And there's also the chat. Perhaps while you just collect yourself, I wanted to talk to Denise about drafting, particularly, the perpetual charitable trust. So, as you know, at the Art of Estate Planning, we provide will templates and particularly testamentary trust is our little genius zone. And I often get asked, oh, well, do you have like the charitable trust precedent? And we don't, because I do feel like it's a specialized area and I'm very mindful of it being done in a half-baked way. And as you said before, you mentioned Denise, the Cypre application and really just not the objectives being achieved. So, Denise, let me know if I've misunderstood this, but equity trustees can work with you as the drafting lawyer to update or add into your will um, the terms to establish the perpetual trust, and you can collaborate so that you can bring in that expertise to create
Most
the
definitely.
structure that you need without referring the entire matter over. Is that right,
Exactly
Denise?
right. Yeah. And particularly where equity, you do want to appoint an external trustee. And to our earlier discussions of being conscious of what does succession look like for that perpetual charitable trust. But yeah, most definitely able to um, review clauses that pertain specifically to that charitable trust. And obviously an option there if you need an external appointment.
That's incredible. I have this notion, and whether it's right or not, of a bit like, the old, I'll just give my wife the right to occupy, or the life estate and the property, and these sort of like old-fashioned ideas of estate planning that a lot of the general public still has. And I feel like charitable trusts and charitable giving potentially falls in that category too, where we are often sitting in front of a client who's got this idea of wanting to set up a charitable trust, but either, they don't have quite the amount of assets to really justify setting up one,
Yeah,
or
definitely.
they haven't really thought through the practical, they have the right intentions at heart, but they don't really think through the logistics and administration and who they want to manage it. And
No,
so
definitely.
I was really excited to hear about the public ancillary fund as another option to still, maybe they don't have enough to support a full charitable trust, but the public ancillary fund is there. So can you talk
Yeah,
to us a little bit
definitely.
about, like, do they, how much involvement is there in nominating the charities who
Yeah,
benefit from the
definitely.
fund?
Yeah, really good question, Tara. And that's the thing. Probably one thing I probably didn't reinforce enough is perpetual charitable trusts, the PCT. So that last box on the right. Let me just quickly flick back to that side. That is probably one of the most expensive
Yeah,
one of
okay,
the
that's important to
explosive.
know.
It's actually this one here, which is the Perpetual Charitable Trust. It's probably one of the most expensive structures to operate, mainly because of the way it is very manual, similar to the private ancillary fund. It needs to be registered separately. And at a certain level, you need financial statements need to be prepared, yada, yada, yada. You've got ACN, so you've got to fill out a million forms. Um, and it is costed at that because of the extra level of governance. Um, and in saying that, a perpetual charitable trust is fantastic when you're dealing with non-DGR one entities. So if your client is very adamant that they want to support a particular type of organization, then and it may very well be that the PCT is the best option. The other thing to think about is actually the cash flow piece. And Tara, to your point of not necessarily thinking through the options, I had a client recently where they were like, oh, I want the organization to receive 20,000 a year forever.
Yeah.
And they thought, and I'm like, well, if you're wanting it to be forever, that means, and you're only giving a percentage of the investment income, that means you've got to have enough corpus to generate 20,000 of investment income. And it's actually thinking through the numbers and the cash flow of how much you need in capital in order to generate enough income to create sustainability forever. So it's actually thinking through with the client, what do you actually want to, and hence why I always say start with the end in mind and then work backwards. And then it's thinking through, okay, at what point could the gift fail? And then trying to work around those challenges. Um, with Tara, your question around how specific do we need to be in instructions? So the great thing about, and I guess it depends ultimately on how much control does the often, as we know, families often want to control from the grave. And it also is oftentimes how much control do they want to have. Some of our families will always be very specific around the entities. So they want to support Salvation Army or RFDS or guide dogs because that's the connection with that entity. And the reality is most of those organizations, the gift won't fail because those orgs will always be with us. Um, a lot of our families will actually put cause areas in place. So I want to support the support of young people in mental health, or I want to support the well-being of the aged in our community, or I want to ensure that I fund activities that promote social inclusion. So and then it allows the trustee to actually look at the cause area and assess who are the most eligible beneficiaries at the time of distribution. And again, that's our area of expertise in terms of subject matter experts on this side, saying if you've got this cause area, these are the five best suited beneficiaries to support and deliver on that objective. But yeah, more often than not, we are actually saying to clients, if you've got, um, if you are wanting to support DGR1 clients, then the sub-account of a public ancillary fund is probably the most efficient and effective way of creating greatest impact for your legacy.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sort of sitting here. We have a lot of sole practitioners in
Mm.
our community, and I, for one, I wouldn't say that I know a lot about the philanthropy landscape or the regulatory environment with it. And I'm good with like drafting a specific gift of cash to a charity in the will. But when it comes to something more than that, where, as you said, they come up with all these crazy ideas. Yeah, $20,000 a year for, great.
Yeah.
But what's the reality of that? I just love the idea of us being supported by the team at Equity Trustees to really help have a structured conversation with the client about the options, and there are, cash gift, perpetual charitable trust, the two types of the ancillary funds, and the reality checking of it, and to really just have someone who knows what they're doing to say, well, okay, this is what's going to happen with these assets that are not currently illiquid. Um, Here's the problems with the charity that you want. Here's some other ways we can still achieve what you want to achieve at the core purpose, but not in the way that you're thinking of, just to sort of avoid. Like the worst case is there is funding available, and because of the legal framework, it ends up getting wasted on
Or it just
court
gets messy for the
approval.
executor to actually execute longer
Yeah,
term. And
that's it. Yeah.
the worst thing would be is for the gift to fail and
Yeah.
the testator's legacy, it just gets caught up in just mess. And we want to, at the end of the day, I think ultimately we just want to do good for the community. And so yeah, always happy to have a conversation and if we can and we've got some sample precedents that we can or cause that can be adjusted as well. So please definitely more than happy to have a conversation.
Thank you so much, Denise. We're pretty much on the top of the hour now, so I'll wrap it up. But that has been so helpful. I think we've all got a really good idea of, the starting point and to reach out to you and the team at Equity Trustees to leverage your expertise when this type of matter comes up for our will drafting. So that's been so helpful. Thank you for your generosity with sharing your time
Absolute
today.
pleasure. Thanks for having me and lovely to meet everyone.
Thank you, Denise. All right, we'll wrap it up and we'll see you all next month. Bye.